Yeah. Okay. My name is Jonathan, and I'm 26 years old. I have lived most of my life here in Aarhus. Since I was 14 years old, I lived here in the city, and I was born in Copenhagen actually. But then I moved here to Jutland with my family, and yeah, for me, I was very attracted to Aarhus because it was a city where my grandparents, they used to have a lot of music gigs there, and my parents as well were musicians. So for me, I always saw Aarhus as a pretty like a cultural crazy place for music and art. So that was what I was really attracted to about Aarhus when I started living here.
Right. And Javier?
My name is Javier. I'm 29 years old. I was born in Argentina, and I've been living in Aarhus for almost 3 years. The reason I moved here is very random. With my partner, we were looking for a place to stay in for a year at least in Europe, and we happened to have a friend couple that they described the city so beautifully that we decided to give it a shot. And eventually that led us to stay here permanently and to co-found an organization with Jonathan called CQ.
Alright. So the first question is, how easily was it for you to adapt to the local context here in Aarhus?
Well, it's a combination, of course, of challenges and advantages. The challenge, of course, is the language. Aarhus is a city that in the last 10 years has been influenced by internationals in a way that it never happened before in its history. And even though English language is very much set in young people's mind in Denmark, not knowing the language represents a lot of challenges and firewalls that you need to learn how to go through. The advantages is that I do believe that this is a city of smiles, at least symbolically. People are very welcoming and volunteering, paying attention to what your neighbor is needing a hand for, are very rooted habits in the city.
Okay, and on the contrary, how was it for you to adapt to the international context here in Aarhus?
For me, it was kind of like a gradual meeting. I don't think when I was younger, when I was in about the age of high school, I didn't realize what a huge international community Aarhus actually had. Maybe because I was in a high school context, so it was a pretty kind of gated Danish community. But actually, as soon as I got out of high school, I started out basically playing in a lot of bands and playing music with a lot of different people, and I started playing with a lot of internationals as well. So I think ever since I stopped high school, I don't know, I gradually just gravitated towards this international community, which I don't know, I think it's actually a very open community that is really willing to accept Danish into it, and who are very eager to learn to get to know some Danish people and some Danish way of doing things and projects basically. So for me it was very natural and very easy to kind of enter this international community. But of course there are many international communities in Aarhus, and there are very also maybe some communities that are a little bit divided by nationality. Of course that goes for the Danish community as well, which is also a national community in a way. So but in general I think that the internationals here, they're very accepting and open to including Danish people.
What are the main cultural differences that you came across in the new environment? We can start with Javier.
In my case, well, the one that caught my attention the fastest was that there are already a couple of generations, I would say at least 3 generations of Danish people that they have really learned to live without damaging each other when it comes to being envious about others people's possession and therefore engaging into criminal behavior like stealing or violenting people on the streets or creating this counterculture of cynicism and basically hopelessness of look at the rich, oh we are so poor even though we're a majority. So that was the first thing, and the second thing is that you have really mastered a very diplomatic mindset when it comes to day-to-day life. It is hard to get a Dane pissed off, I would say. At least when it comes to the most common reasons for somebody to get pissed off. For instance, you didn't realize and you stepped before somebody in the supermarket queue, or you committed a mistake at your job place and you're a vicar, so in theory you're disposable. And in all those situations it is much more common to encounter a humanism on the side of the Danish person.
And Jonathan, how was it for you to, well, what were the main cultural difference you experienced in the new environment with internationals?
I think that there is a little bit of I think basically the Danish culture, because it is so it's kind of own little world which is very cozy and you know, so the Danish mentality is kind of that we are fine on our own in some ways. We don't need to have a lot of kind of like this cultural influx, but for me I think that that is something that is really needed in the Danish society, and but a lot of Danish people they maybe feel that they can kind of like segregate a little bit towards the international community. So I think also the international community has a response, like a psychological response to that, which is also distancing themselves a little bit from the Danish population, maybe, which is of course completely natural. So I would say it's if you have some if you have something to be together about, you know, which for me it comes very much down to kind of trying to be a creative and trying to be a to express myself through some mean of expression, like art or like association work, but then it's very easy to organize around a common agenda. If you don't have this project maybe that is driving you, then I think it's harder to integrate between the two groups. You need to have share a common kind of project, whether it be a music album or a organization or something completely different, like a art festival or something like that, you know, something they can bring people together into like a common shared community and break down the walls of segregation a little bit.
How did your social life change?
So my social life changed in a way that it became much more entrepreneurial. Many of my social relationships are mediated, enhanced by entrepreneurial purposes. As we were talking before, we're in a very important and unprecedented moment in local history that I sometimes like to joke about, that in 20 years, 30 years, the generation of immigrants like myself, we're going to be named after some academic fancy term like the generation of backpackers, or the millennial centennial invasion or something like that. So since we are in such situation, it is very important to create social tissue, what they call social tissue, which are basically infrastructure of belongingness. For instance, organizations, celebrative spaces like festivals, like workshops, incubators. So luckily, what I was looking for my life, which was to have a much more entrepreneurial horizon after I left, emigrated away from my country. I found it here in Denmark. So my day-to-day life is definitely driven by entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial friendship.
Yeah, right. For me, it comes very much down to my sense of kind of like self-identity has changed a lot through engaging with multiple different cultural environments, and that really started, I think, when I was living with my friend Hans, and we were having I think around or we had 1 year we had like 200 people basically coming to our apartment to couch surf. So this kind of like way of experiencing just all of these backpackers coming as kind of like cultural ambassadors in a way that opened my horizon of what kind of life you could live, you know. And then I stopped, I think, to think about myself as a Danish citizen, and I started thinking about myself more as a cosmopolitan citizen, which for me is kind of like is a really important concept. This idea of cultural identity, because that determines a lot about basically what is essentially your morality, and what is essentially your creativity, what is essentially your way of expressing yourself. So yeah, that is what's changed for me, you know. And of course, when you change your perception on yourself, everything around you changes. Your social life, it changes, and your work life changes, and yeah. So of course, that has meant a huge change to consider myself a cosmopolitan rather than a Danish.